second session in the program on the future of business education in the UK, and looking at slightly different angles. We had a very, I thought, interesting session covering some of the new entrants in the market, some of the views of what the HR and personal development world thinks, but there are a great many other themes. The UK business schools and business education is perceived to have a significant cultural and education advantage. Certainly when you speak to the French and various others, they complain bitterly about the unfair advantages that is perceived. But nonetheless, we heard about the various generations of young students coming through, many of whom are not entirely enthralled with the performance of business in general, the business models, and they have expectations. On top of that, companies are beginning to realize that the bottom line can't just be calculated in simple pounds, shillings, dollars, or whatever currency. And they're beginning to realize that they have to respond, and therefore business education needs to respond. So having searched the whole world, we landed upon Oliver, who is the Associate Dean at the Business School at Lausanne in Switzerland. I'm very much looking forward to his comments. Before he starts, I have to say hello to, or what they call in the online world, give a shout out to, is that the correct terminology? To Max Schachener, who is watching in the Austrian Danube Valley. And I'm told that he's invited us to a conference, which was very exciting. And then I was told that the conference is in Liverpool. So with that international global audience, Oliver, over to you.
Thank you very much, Neil. It's a pleasure to be here. As Neil just introduced, I work at a business school in Lausanne. BSL is a school that has existed for 29 years. It's a very small school in comparison to the majority of business schools or business programs represented here. What makes our school special is that it follows a niche in the market, that is, students interested in understanding how businesses convert to becoming more sustainable. All the programs, from the bachelor to the doctorate, including our executive and executive MBA programs, include the values of sustainability, responsibility, and ethics in their teaching. That means that in every single course, whether it's accounting or management strategy, every single professor includes a consideration of their particular subject in light of the values and objectives of sustainability. So my presentation is going to be about the options open and available to schools, but also a proposal to you, or a think piece to you, to take home and perhaps read up on. I have written a short paper, a discussion paper, which I think will be made available. I welcome your comments, ideas, or criticisms. Do take a look at it. It's only 8 pages long. I do intend to follow up with this topic because I personally believe that education, regardless at what level, is always laden with values, whether we like it or not. As academics, we like to think that we are objective, that we know how to interpret data from a neutral perspective, that we understand the difference between beliefs and facts. And in fact, the moment we stand in front of a class of students, we actually represent values and assumptions. And I'd like to point these out. We have a PowerPoint slide that I prepared. So what I will briefly talk about, this is a short presentation, but I welcome your questions afterwards, is what does it mean when we prepare students for their careers? How do we talk about values in teaching and in research? And essentially, I'm asking here, what is the future work environment? Can we know it? How can higher education institutions prepare students for it? And must higher education institutions change the way they operate in order to prepare or better prepare their students? So the first part is, I'd like to say, and what I will do is I will go back to the first page so that you will not read while I talk. There's always a dilemma with PowerPoint slides, is that everybody loves PowerPoint because it acts like a guide, but then everybody in the audience reads the slides and forgets to listen. As I said, higher education is value-laden, like education anywhere. We educate and instruct on the basis of judgments, of injunctions, and of beliefs. Values such as trust. The students trust a teacher. Knowledge is precious. Or that if you work hard and make great effort, it will pay off when done with knowledge. Those are values, those are assumptions we have that underlie why we even go to school or choose to go to continuing education. More responsible decision-making is essentially what all schools want to encourage. If you read the mission statements, the value statements of almost any school today, it is creating new knowledge, helping students become better citizens, all of those lofty statements, and then you ask, well, what does the school really do to live those values on a day-to-day basis? The new work environment that we discussed earlier on, the rapidly changing environment because of technology, because of globalization, has an impact on how students think about their careers. And so inevitably, schools try to catch up or become irrelevant to the students. But catching up means just that. You're always limping behind the actual industrial evolution. And I think young entrepreneurs like Chris know that very well. If you don't go ahead yourself and try something, you will fall behind. Back to my slide. Essentially, we need to acknowledge that we work with assumptions that are based on values, but they also express needs. So we do assume, and we do believe that higher education influences the way students will behave in their careers. Almost every school professes that it will support the students in their professional lives by preparing them better. Thus, schools influence how graduates will act when they are professionals. Meaning that institutions want their graduates not only to be successful, but also to live the values they adopt at that school where they were. All students in higher education, in order to enter into their professional careers, that will allow them to develop a quality of personal lives. Students want to improve the quality of their own lives and of that of their communities. They want meaning. So learning at schools for students, and we've done some research on that, which is in the paper I prepared, students want meaning, not just technical skills. And it's the same for employers. Employers, we asked that will employ graduates, young people from master's degrees, bachelor degrees, or MBAs. They want to see their young employees or their new employees come with the right attitude, come with the skills of team building, emotional intelligence, meaning they can motivate others, they can overcome failures and crises with a smile and move up and move on. Those are the skills employers are looking for. Technical skills, the employees will adapt and learn as they move on. So it's clear that I come to another set of assumptions here. Because of the fast change in industry and job environment, as I said, employers want the right skills and attitudes. And higher education schools can, in fact, incorporate these soft skills, this teaching, in their programs and disciplines. This is what we are working at in our school. It's not an easy matter, and by all means, it's not simple. And I liked what you said earlier about soft skills actually being hard skills. I quite agree in the sense that the people skills for anyone who wants to work in society are crucial, are so important when you develop partnerships, when you develop relationships with customers or with suppliers in a supply chain. So how can schools embark on this change process within themselves? And we have found 3 areas where schools can and do change. The first one is that schools themselves must set the example. It's not do as I say, don't do as I do. It is do as I do. Students observe how their university or their business school actually operates. And the more a school is transparent and explains its own successes and failures to the students, as a case study, for example, the more the students are able to see that learning is a process that has its downs and its ups. And schools are actors in society that can show an example of what it means to be a responsible actor. Whether it's a for-profit school, a non-profit school, such as ours where I work, or a public school. Schools also can focus more on the careers that the students are looking for and their employability. And we heard a good example before of the Pearson's College. There are many different models of teaching, of organizing seminars and workshops that involve industry leaders, that involve employers, and that involve experts from industry, but also from the non-profit sector, where we in Switzerland are very strongly engaged with. And the third area of focus is research and innovation. And this is where many universities find the largest stumbling block, because professors, especially on tenure, are free to research the area they wish to research in. And a school cannot easily tell a professor, now, although you research the interface between technology and automation, you now must introduce ethics, please, or responsible action, or sustainability. And many, many professors will say, that's not my area. Ask an ethics professor to do that. But universities can provide incentives of all sorts, even to tenured faculty, to encourage them to, in the classroom, allow students and help students to understand that although their field of research is terribly specialized, there is always a link to be found between that specialization and responsible management, sustainability, ethics, and diversity in society. So it's not obliging the professors and researchers to change their research. That's not the point. But the point is to help them bring considerations of these important values into the teaching, and possibly into their research publications as well. And universities can provide incentives for that. So here I'm in this slide briefly repeating what I just said. Institutional management should set a best practice example. Pedagogical innovation to integrate the school's values in all classes and programs across every discipline is possible. Even an accounting professor or a chemistry professor or a strategy professor, more likely than others perhaps, can present the students with ethical dilemmas in their specific area of specialization, and thus increase awareness among the students of what it means to interact with these soft skills. And a school can provide incentives for faculty and researchers to consider their specialty in light of these values. Instead of pretending that academia works outside of the field of values, It's much more intelligent to admit that all research, all teaching is done with values either expressed or unexpressed, and to see how how the interaction happens and how that encourages the learning process. This is my concluding slide. Universities, higher education institutions, business schools can focus on setting a best practice example. They should, I believe. They can integrate EDRS, ethics, diversity, responsibility, sustainability in all programs and in their teaching pedagogy. And they can incentivize their professors and researchers and academics to consider their work in light of the values the school wishes to promote. They can, of course, be other values too. I will leave it at that. Questions are welcome.
Okay. I'm very struck by two things, the sort of feedback that I get in doing these events. One, around business studies and management. And there was a small rebellion in Manchester, I think, where the economics students and others who were doing the business courses were not happy that there was no discussion of what had gone wrong in the crash of 2008, to which the reply they received was, we haven't made our mind up and agreed on the research, and we'll teach it when we have agreed. And then the second thing was just wondering about whether or not anybody from Volkswagen ever went on your course before they thought it was a clever idea to game the emissions and other computing data on their cars. Because it seems to me that these provide huge examples of very serious failures which actually hit the bottom line. So it's not just a good and worthy thing to do, but it has a clear impact on what happens in business. How are these things discussed amongst your students, and how do you engage them with these dilemmas?
They are discussed amongst our students. The Volkswagen case is, of course, concerns a neighboring country, but it's a case that is having an impact. The way professors pick it up, and the way I encourage professors to pick it up, is to see an event as that as a potential case study, and to try to understand what were the interests behind the development of the software in these cars, but also what does a company do then, or the mistakes a company makes, to either hide or repair what it is engaged in. It's true that it always takes a bit of time before professors and teachers can pick up a current story that's in the news and discuss it in class, especially if a teacher or an instructor worries that he or she might not have the correct information, and that therefore they had better wait a few years before enough research was done. But students do not want to wait. And it makes sense in classes where a discussion is possible that professors actually engage the students in such discussions. And in my point of view, there is nothing wrong when a professor says, I don't know the answer. In fact, if the professor says, I don't know, but let's spend half an hour searching, everybody open your computers, let's look for X, Y, and Z. Half an hour later, you'll have 20 or 30 students having their hands up because they discovered something. So a teacher can encourage an open discussion in class and admit that he or she doesn't have the answer.
Okay, Ray, would you just like to say you are?
When you talk about academics embracing the values of their institution and their programs, do you think there's perhaps a tension that the allegiance of academics very often, and probably particularly professors, is not often necessarily to their institution, it's to their own disciplinary community of practice, it's to their own sort of guild, as it were, which is often an international community and probably where their next job is coming from. And very often the values of those communities are sometimes in tension with the institution that actually employs them, of course, which makes them very difficult kinds of institutions to manage. They're very unruly places. How do you get around that?
Mm-hmm. There definitely is a tension, you are right. I've often had to sit down with a professor myself and help him or her imagine that even though their specialism, their focus of their research is in one particular area that seems so far away from any values, to actually have them think about the assumptions they're working on, even in their research. And so far, I've always succeeded in getting them to admit that, in fact, there are some assumptions and values that are underlying the work they do, even though they never speak about them. But the more importantly to me is not to have the professor or the academic change what they're researching. That's their right to decide what they wish to research in. But it is to help them change the way they teach by encouraging them more workshop style of teaching, for example. Encouraging them to engage students in team-based learning projects where you get the students to work together as small groups. This works even in large amphitheater lecture halls, where the students begin to have to ask each other questions and then evaluate as peers how they answer each other's questions. Get that debate flowing. And actually, the professors themselves come back to me and said, I had the most enriching class last semester. I learned more than I think the students did. Because it's through the discussion with all these young brains sitting in the classroom that the professor also learns. That is so precious. And what I always tell the students when they first come to the school is I say, this is a learning organization. Don't expect our school to be perfect. We make mistakes like any organization does. Be here as a student and contribute to the learning of everybody. And the students actually appreciate the honesty. They come back later on and they say, I think you made a big mistake there. You should change how you do that. And I tell them, thank you. We will do our best.
Okay. Question, contribution front.
Thank you. Hello, my name's Lucy Melville. I work for a Swiss academic publisher. I'm very interested in your talking about EDRS, and particularly, obviously, as an academic publisher, how we can embed that in our publishing. But I wanted to ask you, whose ethics are we talking about? Where we have these conflicts in an increasingly global world with all sorts of economies waning, growing, different religious, societal pressures, what can we embed in the pedagogy you mention that will speak to us all universally?
Mm-hmm. Good question. I work at an international school. 90% of our students are not Swiss. They come from all parts of the world and all religious backgrounds. I have never had a student who has come to me to complain that the values we stand for as a school do not match their background or their particular sense of what is right and wrong. I think the way we may overcome such complaint is that we ask all the professors to use case studies in their teaching. And then to offer the students the opportunity not just simply to answer a case study questions as they are published, but also to think about the problems that a case study shows in light of the values they consider precious. So it's not that we dictate ethics is this and not that. It is think of the values you live with and then decide whether what you have just studied made sense or whether you thought it was wrong. And can you explain it?
Okay. Again, you can say where you're from and who.
Right, I'm Christine O'Leary. I'm from Sheffield Hallam University, Sheffield Business School. I was particularly interested in your presentation. We are a very large business school and we've just been in the process in the last 2 years of embedding the principle of responsible management education in all our curriculum, that's undergraduate and postgraduate. But we've also got a lot of sandwich courses, And how do you deal with any tensions with business partners in terms of these values of responsible management?
So,
Because that's something that we're grappling with.
sandwich course is work placements.
Yes.
Is that a Swiss word, sandwich course?
No, it's not a Swiss word.
No, right. Basically, the students do 3 years at the university, and in their third year, they actually do a placement.
Yes, I understand. Yes.
In a business. But that's not compulsory, although it is in some courses. So obviously, when they are working in the business, there may be tensions in terms of the values of that business or the practices.
Right.
And they may. So how would you deal with the tensions, or do you not come across that in your own practice?
I have, in the 4 years I've been at Business School Lausanne, I've never had an employer tell me that the student is living the wrong values. Employers hire the graduates who they find most appropriate for the position they have. And whether a student then, or a former student, then continues to live the same values on a daily basis on their job is up to the student's own conscience. My conscience at school is to give them the best opportunity to think about how their own values can be lived in a professional environment on a daily basis. That's what I'm interested in. I don't want to hide and pretend that we can live value-free, but I don't want to tell a student what the values are they must live by. Teaching responsible decision-making inevitably is not merely just teaching critical thinking. It's actually teaching through models, through simulations, case studies, examples. We bring in a lot of professionals into the seminars who talk about their own experience at work, is to help students understand that if they need to make a difficult decision, they ought to try to think about the effects their decisions will have. To me, that is being responsible.
I meant on the business side, so not the students going in with certain values, ethical values, and finding that the practices of the business they're doing their work experience in are quite different. So it's reconciling that.
I'm not so sure exactly what your question then is. The tension you mean is more within the employer.
That's, well, if you like, the students learning from practices that may be not so ethical within the business itself.
Yes?
To give an example, the person works at FIFA
Yes.
in the last year. Give you a local example.
We do. In fact, we had a professor who came from FIFA to teach with us.
Okay.
A project manager from FIFA. Employers, again, hire the students they find are most appropriate for the jobs they have. Whether the employer then feels there's a tension between... I have difficulty answering this question because I'm not sure exactly. I cannot speak for the employer. Most employers claim that their organization stands by values. And usually I haven't seen a contradiction. I haven't seen an employer saying, we don't believe in responsible management. So what then happens within the organization where a graduate may go to work to, that's not under my control, and probably the employer might be rather embarrassed about it as well. When it is